Today I'm speaking with Christine DeLozier. She is an author, an acupuncturist, and herbalist. Today we're going to be talking about what foods we should be including in our diet for great sex. I hope you enjoy it. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast for this week. This week, we have a very interesting subject. We are going to be talking about our diet and how we eat, but specifically on how we can increase pleasure in our lives. So I want you to please welcome my special guest this week, which is Christine DeLozier. How are you, Christine?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm thinking when the suggestion came through, I'm like, ooh, we haven't spoken about this before. So I'm loving this. And you're also a qualified acupuncturist. And from what I hear, you do specialize in, blood flow and, sexual pleasure.
Sexual health. Yep. I specialize in sexual health. So, yeah.
And so how did you fall into that?
Well, honestly, I did literally fall into it, quite honestly. I was doing what a lot of acupuncturists do, which is treating a lot of back pain, neck pain, headaches, things like that. We treat a lot of that. So one of my patients I was treating for back pain came in one day. This was, years ago, early in my practice, when I was a newbie, right out of acupuncture school. And he asked me if I could help him to have stronger erections. And I said, sure, let's give it a whirl. But the thing about it is treating somebody for stronger erections, it's a lot different than treating somebody for back pain. Some of the needles that we use in the places that we put them are quite different. And where I wanted to put a needle with this particular gentleman was in his perineum, which is, between the testicles and the anus. And so it was it was definitely a different thing for me, a little bit out of my comfort zone, just asking him if I could do that, quite honestly. But it's, he was fine with it. He had such good results that he was, it made a big difference to him, to his partner. And then I had several patients right after that, right in a row, have great results. And I thought, this is something that's very difficult to treat, period. And it made me want to specialize in it, because I just thought the fact that we're getting such good results was, this is a really meaningful way to spend my time. So, so that's how I got there. And then, I've always been kind of obsessed with food, if you will. I've always been a foodie and had this idea that the best approach to health is, just to kind of live in accordance with the biological design of human beings. And that includes what we put into our mouths. So, but before I was an acupuncturist, I trained to be a research scientist. So I wanted to kind of take a scientific look at, what does the science and the evidence have to say on this subject? So that is the subject of my book. But it's not a sciencey type. I mean, it is sciencey, but it's like a fun kind of thing. I wanted to take all that, boring medical literature and create something that was, fun and easy to read that my patients could enjoy.
No, I love that. Now we're going to talk about your book in a moment, which is called Diet for Great Sex. But I want to circle back on the acupuncture thing, because from my understanding, because I've had acupuncture many times, is that when you're inserting the needles on certain meridian points, it's helping to clear any energetic blocks so that the chi or the energetic flow can flow without any interruption. Is that right?
Yeah, we get the chi flowing. Where there's blockage, we have things like pain or other dysfunction. And when chi flows freely and abundantly, we have health and we have, no pain. So yes, that's what we're doing. Those meridians correspond with the nervous system and the vascular system. So we have a traditional way of understanding how acupuncture works. And we have a biomedical understanding of how acupuncture works. And, the biomedical understanding is we're stimulating nerve pathways. And the reason that's important is because every substance, produced by our bodies, every hormone, every neurotransmitter is ultimately controlled by the nervous system. So when we stimulate pathways, we affect change in the biochemistry of the body. And that's shown, that's proven in research. So things that have been studied in relation to acupuncture are things like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, histamine, cortisol, things like that, and even sex hormones. So that's kind of how acupuncture operates. We have the energetic understanding, and then we have the, nerve and endocrine kind of understanding.
Right. So do we have an understanding of why the blockages happen in the first place?
Well, okay, so we have to look at this from the two lenses. Even our emotions can cause blockages. Our diets can cause blockages. There are certain things that are taxing to the body. So if you, standing, sitting, those things are taxing to the body. They encourage the formation of these gummy kind of adhesions all throughout your body. When we eat a poor diet, we see plaque accumulation. That's a physical blockage of those meridians. Our emotions and stress, we know that this causes disease. And so often when somebody has some sort of illness, they can trace it back to a time in their lives that was really rough emotionally. We know that different emotions, and at least the Chinese medical understanding of it is that different emotions are associated with different organ systems. So anger damages the liver. Or when you have liver problems, you have anger. Anger is associated, it's the emotion associated with liver pathology, if you will. Fear is associated with the kidneys. So in the case of things like sexual abuse and that sort of thing, it's something that damages the kidneys. Grief is associated with the lungs, and joy is associated with the heart, and even that in excess can be damaging. So
an excessive of joy. I didn't think that was possible.
I'm thinking of it more of like a mania,
Right. Is there such a thing as being too happy? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but.
Yeah. All right. So it sounds like, a two-pronged approach is, a really great way for us to get our sexual health back. Because, we get to this age, males and females, and our bodies are going through changes, and we've got hormonal differences and so forth. So it can affect our desire for sex and, our pleasure, of course. So if we're doing something like acupuncture, that sounds awesome. But then if we combine it with something like our diet, it sounds like we've got, the perfect solution to be able to really help us to get back into our groove again.
Yeah, that's the thing is when we think about, what does great sex look like? We usually think of it as a psychological phenomenon, the right person, the right mood, all those things. But physiologically, great sex is when our nerves are firing strong, rapid signals of pleasure to and from our genitals. It's when our hormones are balanced, and it's when our blood vessels are delivering abundant blood flow. And that's not just important for erections. That's important for female pleasure. It's important for clitoral sensitivity. It's important for orgasm. It's important for lubrication, for all those things. And our diet very much affects all of these factors, both even in the short term. So one example that I like to use is leafy greens, because they're just one of the absolute best foods that you can eat for better sex. So leafy greens are loaded with antioxidants. And in research, the slower your nerve conduction, the less pleasure you have, the more difficulty it is, you have achieving orgasm, the less, the less it just doesn't feel as good. And, all those things are affected. But antioxidants were shown in research to strengthen and speed nerve conduction and to even overcome those sluggish nerves. So they did some studies, for example, with type 2 diabetics, which is, type 2 diabetes is notorious for its sexual side effects. And, for females, making for difficult orgasm, lubrication, that sort of thing. And for males, weakening erectile strength. So with antioxidant supplementation, though, those nerves fired stronger and people had better sex, more satisfying, and all of those dimensions improved. So leafy greens are a real big force when it comes to antioxidants. And it's one of the best things that you can have for your vascular system as well. So all of those micronutrients, they kind of luxuriate the blood vessels. They improve the elasticity of those blood vessels. They encourage the removal of calcifications from those blood vessels, which stiffen them. And then also, leafy greens even kind of benefit our sex hormones. So most of us operate on high cortisol levels because we have stress in our lives. We have a lot of demands on our time. And leafy greens were shown in research to reduce cortisol levels. And, what happens is you get an indirect bump in testosterone, which again is not just important for guys. Cortisol sabotages testosterone. When our cortisol is high, testosterone goes down, and that reduces libido and other, aspects of sexual health. So leafy greens have this they're this great package all around for all of these aspects of sex.
I love that. And so leafy greens, please don't tell me you're talking about kale.
Well, you don't have to eat kale. You could get, if you like some spinach, there's all sorts of great leafy greens.
Yes.
I mean, we've got even cilantro, parsley, green leaf lettuces, romaine lettuce, spinach and all those things. And then if you can always put them in a smoothie too. If you're not a big salad person, just throw a couple handfuls of the baby spinach in your morning smoothie, and it really, you don't even notice the flavor difference too much. And it adds a whole lot of all that, those sexual benefits.
Yeah, no, to me, eating kale is like eating thistles.
Have you ever tried it with, have you ever tried kale chips, like baking it with a little olive oil and salt?
I have. I can do that to a certain extent.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, you're open. You're open to trying it out.
But arugula, I'm all over that. I'm all over.
Oh, there you go.
That's my leafy green. That's my
there
favorite.
You go. Oh yeah.
All right. So we've got some leafy greens, which is great. So, so what are some of the other things that we could be adding to our diet that's going to really help with our, sexual pleasure?
Oh, there's all sorts of things. One of the things that's really sorely neglected in our diets in relation to sex is potassium. So humans used to get about 10 times as much potassium as sodium in our diets. And now we take in about the opposite. It's about 10 times as much sodium as potassium. And this ratio, this balance is very important for sexual health. It's actually very important for mental health as well. I mean, there's a huge relationship between our potassium intake and things like anxiety, depression, so those getting the least amount of potassium in their diet have, more anxiety, more depression, things like that. And potassium has been shown in research to help treat depression and things like that, which is important for sex too. But for our blood vessels, when we take in all this salt, our kidneys have to flush potassium in order to deal with all the salt that we're taking in from all these processed foods. And then top that off with the fact that most of us aren't even getting enough of it. There were 2 studies I read, and both of them showed that over 90% of Americans are not getting enough potassium in our diets. So it's a huge deal. What this does is it wreaks havoc on our blood vessels. So it again, like we were talking about earlier, it encourages calcification of those blood vessels. It stiffens them, and it just is bad for arterial health. And that's not what we want for great erections. Potassium also even had some benefit in the short term. So 2 hours after a high potassium meal, our arteries were actually measurably more elastic, which means that they're able to bring a little bit more blood flow, which is pretty nice. So potassium is a big one.
So other than bananas, where do we get potassium from?
The thing about it is, actually, you'd be surprised. There's not a long list of foods that have a significant amount. Like I'm talking about more than like 10% for a serving. The ones that have maybe double that are baked yam, but you have to have it with the skin on it, because about 40% of the minerals like, potassium and magnesium are in the skin. Same thing with a baked potato, squash, mango, an orange. Well, some of the resources I read said that oranges only had about 10%. Others said that it was about 20%. So that's debatable. But leafy greens are another one that have a good amount of potassium in it. So if you have something like a big leafy green salad for lunch, and you have a baked yam with it, along with, maybe some cruciferous vegetables and whatever else you like, you're going to get about half of what you need for the day just in that one meal. So it's a good, a good small step to, a small change with big benefits to make in our diets.
Right. So we've talked a lot about veggies, which is great. So are there any kind of fruits or other food groups that we should also be looking at including?
Yeah. One of them is omega-3 fatty acids.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, important for mental health, important for vascular health, and also important for the dopamine pathways. Remember, orgasm is a huge release of dopamine. So anything that disrupts that dopamine, those dopamine pathways is, something that we want to deal with. It's going to hamper sex, so not getting enough omega-3s, because our brain is largely fat. And of that fat, about 20% of it is omega-3s, and our bodies can't produce it. We need to take it in from the food that we eat. And when we don't have enough of that omega-3, again, we have trouble with those chemical communicators of pleasure.
Right. So in the book, Diet for Great Sex, I'm assuming you were talking, you've got a little bit of the science and understanding that. Do you have recipes? What's in the book that we need to look at?
Well, I've got lots of recipes in there. And there's also a plan. And actually, there's a whole chapter. It's a bonus chapter that I really felt compelled to add. And that's tips for pleasing your partner. It's a whole chapter on a whole section on male oral sex and on female oral sex. It's a tutorial. I just felt like that needed to be in there, even though that's the only part. I mean, if we're talking about things you put in your mouth here, that's the theme in the book, because I was going to say, well, how does that really relate to diet? Well, that's the only way I can relate it is through that. But lots of recipes. One of my favorites is a date night sex menu. So what the date night sex menu does is it takes all of the foods that were found to have short-term benefits to sex and kind of creates a menu out of that. So we talked about potassium. Another one is, naturally occurring nitrates, which a lot of times athletes use them before a competition, like beet juice or greens, that sort of thing, because they dilate blood vessels, and that's what we want. They also, have polyphenols are also another one that improved arterial function in the short term. And then we want to avoid those things that stiffen blood vessels. So a really salty meal is going to have a stiffening effect, even in that 30 minutes post-eating.
Stiffening effect, but not in a good way.
Right, exactly. Yes. And then a really greasy meal has a couple effects. One of them is that it lowers testosterone. So testosterone dips after a really, greasy meal. And it also, arteries are measurably stiffer after a greasy meal, but omega-3 fatty meal actually had the opposite effect on arteries in the short term. So, so our date night sex menu kind of combines all of these different little tidbits. And, it's a subtle effect for sure. It's not like Viagra, but it is significant. So for example, one study, what it did is it gave participants one serving of spinach and then measured their salivary nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is what dilates blood vessels. They measure their nitric oxide 2 hours after eating one serving of spinach, and it was 8 times that of baseline. Wow. After one serving. So that's pretty significant, How
big is a serving? How big was that serving?
I don't recall, but I would imagine it's probably about 2 cups.
Mm-hmm. Right. So a salad.
Right. Exactly. Yep. A salad.
Yeah. Cool. And so we've heard of what we should be including. Is there any truth to things like aphrodisiac type of foods? And then we hear about oysters and so forth. Do they have any kind of positive effect?
So I have a whole chapter on aphrodisiacs, and I wanted to include only those that had some kind of scientific research to, show their efficacy. most of those we're only talking about a few studies. This has not been widely studied. So the aphrodisiac chapter is, like the rest of the book has a whole lot of research to back it up. The aphrodisiac, it's like, okay, let's include it. It's relatively safe if you're talking about a culinary aphrodisiac like cloves or nutmeg or saffron, something like that. It's safe. And yeah, there's a few studies showing that it works. So why not have fun with it and, play around with it? Cloves in one study were shown to improve sexual satisfaction and libido within an hour, I believe, of eating it. And the way that worked was by giving you a slight bump in testosterone. Right. So a lot of the culinary aphrodisiacs, just what the studies that are out there either showed that they had a strong antioxidant effect or they bumped up testosterone.
Right. Cool. One
of the more widely studied culinary aphrodisiacs is saffron. So compared to the other ones, saffron, I saw maybe a dozen studies on saffron, showing positive effects.
Wow. That's an interesting one. I hadn't even thought of that. So a good Indian meal by the sounds of things.
Yeah. A nice saffron rice. Yeah.
Yeah. With some leafy greens.
Yep.
Sounds awesome. And so we've talked about a few of the foods that we should be avoiding, but I think, well, correct me if I'm wrong, that in the book, it's not just what to eat on date night, but it's what to incorporate into your eating plan ongoing that's going to help with health.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, the whole diet is about ongoing, dietary habits for good sexual health, meaning those that will keep the flow going, that'll keep nerve conduction strong or strengthen it if it needs to be strengthened, and balance hormones, that sort of thing. Yes, it is an ongoing strategy. There's just that one very small section that talks about the date night menu, but everything else, the longer you eat well and care for your body, the better you're going to, the better sex is going to be. But also, I was going to have another point here, which is that, I lost my train of thought.
No, it's all right. So we're talking about your long-term goals. Like, it's not just a one and done, have a spinach before you,
Yeah, that's more just for fun. It's not going to give you the long-term kind of benefits that you're looking for sure.
Yeah. All right. So Christine's book is called Diet for Great Sex. And we can get that on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and so forth. Christine also has a Instagram site, which is instagram.com/diet for great sex. I like that. And on Facebook, you can find her at facebook.com/Christine DeLozier author. Love it.
Yep. Great.
So thank you so much for your time today, Christine. I knew this was going to be an awesome subject for us to talk about. And it's not just sexual health and sexual pleasure, but it's really looking after ourselves, because, what you've been identifying is really a lot of inadequacies in the diet, and we are talking about the American diet, but I'm sure that's, pretty much worldwide, that, we have these deficiencies. And sometimes we don't realize it's something simple like this that can make such a big difference when it comes to our health and our pleasure. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been awesome chatting with you.
That's been fun. Thank you so much for having me on the show.